Hi, everyone. Welcome again to our FCCJ online press conferences. We had some the proverbial technical difficulties, which meant we had to delay our press conference by 8 minutes. So my apologies for that. I am David McNeil, the co-chair of the Professional Activities Committee, PAC, at the FCCJ here in Tokyo. Beside me is Teddy Jimbo. He is my fellow co-chair, and he will be manning the controls today for people who are dialing in to ask questions. And over here is Pio D'Emilia of Sky TG24. He was instrumental in setting up this press conference. Well, tomorrow is the 31st anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, but the annual vigil in Hong Kong to mark that occasion has been banned for the first time in its history. That's an ominous sign to some of tightening control by Beijing over the semi-autonomous region. Last week, of course, China's National People's Congress approved a new national security law for Hong Kong. If that goes ahead, it could shatter the framework of one country, two systems, and Hong Kong may lose freedoms it has kept since the UK returned the province to Chinese rule in 1997. Well, we're very proud to have with us three young democracy activists who are going to give us their take on what is happening from the ground in Hong Kong. We will name them as Joshua Wong. Joshua is sitting on your right there with the black t-shirt. Agnes Chow is in the middle. And Wong, of course, may be Hong Kong's best known pro-democracy campaigners. And he and Chow are members of the Demo Sisto Party, which advocates autonomous rule. And over there on the other side is Nok-hin. He is a former lawmaker in the city's legislature who was arrested in a police roundup last month. The city's future is on the line, according to many, and there are fears growing that Beijing's grip on Hong Kong is tightening. That's the introduction. I believe that Agnes is going to speak first. For people who are joining us, we have some questions and some people lined up already, but if you would like to send in a question by email, I'll read out the address. It's news@fccj.or.jp. I think it's going to flash up on the screen. There it is. So if you'd like to send in a question, assuming we have time, well, we will put it to the three speakers. Agnes, over to you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes.
Okay.
Very well.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this press conference in Japan. And I'm Agnes Chow. I'm a member of Demosisto, a political group, a young activist group in Hong Kong. Well, tomorrow will be the 4th of June, which is the 31st anniversary, or you can say 31st year after 1989, the Tiananmen massacre. And this would be also the first, June 4th, that our candlelight vigil, our assembly, will be banned by the authority, banned by the government under the reason of the coronavirus. So it is a very obvious that our regime and our government is using the coronavirus as an excuse to suppress the movement, the democratic movement in Hong Kong. And as all you might know that the national security law is actually coming, and it has already been get passed in Beijing already, and it's coming to Hong Kong. And the coming national security law will be a total destruction of the one country, two systems of Hong Kong, and also total destruction of the freedom and political rights that Hong Kong people are enjoying. We believe that Hong Kong, as an international financial city, one of the advantages of Hong Kong is that we have our one country, two systems. We have our separate systems from China. We have our separate legislature and judiciary and our executive system also. But the communist regime is now trying to destroy these kind of advantages that all Hong Kong people and even the international communities are enjoying. So well, if you said, oh, well, many media might ask that, are we scared of national security law, or what will we face after the national security law, comes to Hong Kong? It's always a lie to say that we are totally not afraid, and it's also very unimaginable that Hong Kong will soonly become a place like China, that human rights activists will be suppressed and even arrested, put into the jail for 10 years or 20 years. And this might be the future of Hong Kong. And it's, of course, a very sad thing that, well, as a Hong Kong people, we are always fighting very hard to protect our hometown. But it seems that the Chinese government is never trying to listen to the voice of Hong Kong people, but always trying to control more to Hong Kong politically and economically.
Thank you very much. Next person who is going to make a statement, I believe, is that Joshua? Oh, sorry.
I am Nok-hin. Yeah,
Yeah,
I am the former legislative councillor, and I have been as a district councillor for 8 years. My legislative councillor's duty end last year's on September because of the disqualification of Court of Final Appeal. Now I would like to just continue what Agnes Chow said. How the Hong Kong government tried to use COVID-19 as an excuse to try to suppress Hong Kong's freedom and democracy, and how it implies to the future legislation of national securities law. Actually, our government has already used so many measures in the excuse of COVID-19 to try to suppress the freedom of expression in Hong Kong. Like every week, we have different kinds of assembly or political protests, whatever it is legal or illegal. They try to use when there are certain people being gathered. The police try to use the fines as a penalty to control the crowd. And second, just like some of these restaurants saying they support the anti-extradition movement, the police try to investigate inside and try to investigate so frequently. That means you can't do the business for that restaurant for many cases. But now Hong Kong is under the threats of the ruining of the institution. The street protests is at the surface, but what it is now happening is something like the authoritarianism is substituting the professionalism, and the political correctness is replacing the meritocracy in Hong Kong. Just like for the public exam in Hong Kong, the DSE exam, the Education Bureau has tackled down some of the content and the questions being examined to the student only because of political correctness about the invasion of Japan in 1940 to 1945. And there is also many complaints being encouraged by pro-Beijing lawmakers and politicians, trying to say that if there is any political incorrectness being spoken online, they will file a complaint to the Education Bureau. And according to the figures being provided by Education Bureau, there are about 171 teachers being complained because of the political speeches. And it is very problematic because the tactics is cultural revolution alike. Every people working as a civil servant or even teachers or any other profession are now worried of any kinds of political incorrectness would have the subsequence to their promotion or their future. And what I would like to emphasize right now is such act is only the episode of national securities law. The Chinese let the promotion materials, like they have just made a movie called Another Version of Hong Kong, trying to use many fake news, including saying the professional union of teachers trying to lead the protest somehow, which is not the true version and the reality. And it could becomes the fake evidence, and there will have the subsequence of the teachers and professional sectors in Hong Kong being suppressed because of such pressure. And the national security laws, no one could estimate what will happen. Some may estimate that would there be possibility for the opposition in Hong Kong participating in the coming Legislative Council elections? We still do not have a very clear idea about that. But at least a pro-Beijing leader, Tam Yu Chong, which is also very friend to Beijing, just speak publicly yesterday, saying that if there is any politicians not supporting national security law, there may be subsequent not respecting basic law, and they are not qualified to participate in Legislative Council election. And I think that it is not impossible. And I would like to say to the international community is that please support Hong Kong's values. And we do not want a Hong Kong which is only about political correctness, but not as an international hub in the world.
Thank you very much, Nok-hin. And Joshua, do you want to make a statement?
Thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure to join the press conference in FCC of Japan to give a brief update on what's happening with the implementation of the national security legislation. As we all aware, one country, two systems should be protected according to the framework of Sino-British Joint Declaration. But once Beijing announced that hope and wish to implement this national security legislation to Hong Kong, one country system eroded to be one country, one system, and is how Beijing broke the promise in this international treaty and turned Hong Kong to be a nightmare. Perhaps national security seems to be quite common all over the world, no matter in country with democratic system or not. But just make it clear, in the context and the framework of Hong Kong, national security just means how loyal to Beijing and serving the interests of the communist regime instead of really safeguarding the basic freedom of Hong Kongers. With the anti-subversion regulation, we would conclude or summarize the national security legislation as kind of the speech crime. And most terrible issue is once the national security law passed, we might not be arrested by Hong Kong police anymore. In Hong Kong, protesters, journalists, NGOs, or religious groups might be arrested by secret police appointed from Beijing. In the previous day, we might still face prosecution in Hong Kong's High Court, but later on, the court prosecution might take place in mainland China. As the one who have been serving jail sentence for 3 times in Hong Kong, I just worry that in the future, when President Xi Jinping continue to tightening Hong Kong's freedom, we might need to serve jail sentence in Beijing. Apart from political freedom, national security legislation is also affecting the free flow of information, free flow of capital, and also economic freedom that remain Hong Kong's status as the global financial center. I just remember the Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg just announced that he's strongly concerned whether Facebook can still provide service for Hong Kongers after national security legislation passed and imposed in Hong Kong, which means that when this law implemented to Hong Kong, maybe the Great Firewall might not only set up in mainland China anymore, it may also apply at Hong Kong. So while always, no matter Nok-hin, Agnes, and I will emphasize that time is running out in Hong Kong, and it seems to be the beginning of the end. Today is the day before the 31st anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. And it's also the first time, no matter before or after handover, Hong Kong authorities banned our demonstration and assembly to commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre at Victoria Park of Hong Kong. We call on international community to stand with Hong Kong to oppose this national security legislation. Especially, we wish world leaders could realize that supporting Hong Kong is not about anti or pro-China or not. It's about right or wrong. is about how we could safeguard Hong Kong as the global financial center. Since Xi Jinping as the one who will take the leadership and continue to silencing the voice of Hong Kongers, I just worry that the first is Hong Kong, the next is Taiwan, and later on is the rest of Asia. When China, Beijing, is expanding its influence not only in Hong Kong, but even in whole Asia Pacific, we urge more leaders in Asia could send a clear warning signal to Beijing. Tightening Hong Kong's freedom should not be the way out. Eroding the one country, two system to one country, one system will just trigger more tension between Hong Kongers and the authoritarian regime. So tomorrow, no matter Beijing ban our protest or not, I still believe that more and more Hong Kongers will take to the street and let Beijing know that we oppose the national security legislation. In 2019, more than millions of Hong Kongers took to the street and result in Beijing accept to withdraw the controversial extradition bill in September in 2019. So in 2020, when Beijing planned to introduce this evil law to Hong Kong, I think after the brief summary of the update of the situation of Hong Kong by Nok-hin and how Agnes emphasizing of the problem of the national security legislation, we wish more journalists around the world to pay attention to Hong Kong and keep Hong Kong under the global spotlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Okay, well, we will go straight to questions from waiting journalists. We have a list, and the first person up is Andy Sharp, and he is with the Nikkei here in Tokyo. Andy, have you got your question ready?
Hold on. Where's Andy?
You're muted, Andy. Just make sure your sound is on.
Yep, got it. Okay, good now. Hi there. Thanks for coming and speaking to the FCCJ. The whole world right now is fighting the coronavirus, the US especially, and of course the US is also seeing its own protests now. So I wanted to tie this to the passing of the national security legislation in China. Do you think that the Chinese government passed this legislation because the world is distracted by the virus and other issues right now? And secondly, yesterday, Carrie Lam said that the US had double standards for criticizing the police handling of protests in Hong Kong, while at the same time, we're seeing many, many images of police brutality in the US handling the protests there. So could you answer those questions, please? And that could be to any of you.
Thank you, Andy. Who would like to answer those questions? We can't hear you. Wait a second. Hold on. Agnes, just wait a second. Are they muted?
Yeah. Hold on.
Sorry, just give us a minute here to get the sound sorted out.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
It's very obvious that the Hong Kong government is always trying to use, well, an excuse called coronavirus to suppress, the protest movement in Hong Kong. And just like what Nok-hin said, or that even the Hong Kong police is using the coronavirus to, like, for example, to often go to, like, for example, the shops and restaurants who supports the democratic movement in Hong Kong and charge them and charge their staffs, etc. They're always using the virus COVID-19 as a reason to arrest people and young activists. And also, well, we could also see that, I would say that the main reason that China is implementing the national security law is that, from last year, from the extradition law movement, we can see that there in Hong Kong, there are, of course, a lot of movement demonstrations happening. And also there are more and more communication between the Hong Kong community and the international community. And also last year, the states passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act and the states. So I would say that these kinds of communication with the international community is what the communist regime doesn't want to see the most. They I could say that they don't really like, or they really hate these kinds of communication, because it would really it, well, it would really become some, well, real pressure to the Chinese regime that they have to do something to explain to the international community. So this is what I think is the main reason that the Beijing is, well, insists implementing the national security law.
Refer to the question, no doubt at all how Beijing took advantage during the outbreak of COVID-19 when the world need to deal with the pandemic. They just put effort into silencing the voice of dissident and protester in Hong Kong. And more important with the wolf diplomacy, they just try to expand and also support it authoritarian ideology, not only in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc., but also affected the Western world. No matter how they export the fake surgical masks to Italy or other European country, or how even WHO decided to investigate on where those coronavirus come from, and China reject it. It also imply when the world need to deal with the pandemic come from China, but China is just putting the effort and attention, hope to turn Hong Kong to be another Xinjiang and Tibet. And with the question about what's my point of view on the protests, on Twitter, I just mentioned that how, as a human rights activist, I stand firmly on the side of Black Lives Matter, especially political crisis must solve by political system reform. How to hold the police accountability should be the responsibility of the government, of the leaders in the United States.
Referring to the last questions, what I think is police brutality is a universal problem. Mrs. Carrie, she can say that the content. But what I think is it doesn't prove she's right. The police brutality in Hong Kong happens for more than almost a year. But the problem is that even finding out the truth, to setting up an independent commission investigating the problem, which is also being denied by Hong Kong. And without setting up truth of the problems about the police brutality, it is impossible to step forward for a society from different sides.
Thank you. Does the reaction of the American leadership to the protest in America make your cause more difficult? In other words, so Dozo, go ahead.
I think how Beijing take advantage during the outbreak of COVID-19 is the most significant factor to distract people and world leaders' attention on Hong Kong. As all we remember, even on 1st of January of 2020, more than 1 million Hong Kongers took to the street to urge for political system reform, free election, and etc. But later on, once the outbreak of COVID-19 happened, the world suddenly shift the focus and all discuss on how to deal with the pandemic. So I think compared to the protests or the clash happened on different city or regions in the United States in the previous few days, I think more and more easy for us to realize is how and what have done by China in the previous half year is the most problematic situation that generated and to let Hong Kong protests face more restriction. But I think even this kind of uphill battle, we still need to continue this fight.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Nakano Hirofumi, and he is a freelancer. Nakano-san? Just make sure your mic is turned on. Yep.
Yeah, it's on. Hey, thanks, Joshua, Agnes, and No. I have two questions for any of you. And the first question is, if the current situation in Hong Kong gets worse, do you think a number of Hong Kongers seriously consider fleeing to other countries like Taiwan or UK or somewhere else? And my second question is, do you have anything to say on President Trump? He might help you in Hong Kong, but actually he has divided his own country.
In response to whether the people will leave Hong Kong because of the future legislation of national securities law. There is a there is a progress or there is a situation like more Hong Kong people are now applying for the British overseas passports. And it could be a signal that people are becoming not so confident with the future in Hong Kong right now. But what I would like to say is it depends on how much suppression that Chinese government impose to Hong Kong. If there is, just like China, many of the people only strike for their human rights and could be sentenced in name of national security. And that would not, that will say that the one country, two systems would not be continued in future. And many people will lose the confidence. And yeah, that would be the consequence that people will consider going to another way.
Well, I would say that actually after the announcement of the implementation of the national security law, there are already a lot of Hong Kongers thinking of moving to other places or countries. And actually on the day of the announcement of the law, according to the Google search ranking in Hong Kong, the keyword which placed on top of our Google search ranking is actually migration. So, well, there are already a lot of people thinking of moving to other places. And, well, we'll clearly see that the national security law is bringing a lot of, the white horror to Hong Kong people, that people are scared of that the future of Hong Kong will be directly ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, and Hong Kong would become just like an ordinary city in China, but not, without one country, two system and, judicial independence. So, this is one of the things that we could see, that a lot of Hong Kong people are scared or really concerned about the national security law. And regarding to your second question, I would say that, Hong Kong as an international financial city, whether Hong Kong can have our one country, two system, can keep our difference other than other cities from China, would be very important, not only to Hong Kong people, but also to the international community, including the states. So, like, for example, there are always a lot of, international corporations setting up their headquarters or offices in Hong Kong. And, and this is because of the advantages of Hong Kong, that we are kind of different from China. We have our separate political system. But if the Communist Party insists to destroy our advantages that Hong Kong people and the international community are enjoying, it would be destructive to the whole world.
One point I would like to add is, after the national security law in Hong Kong, Beijing's next target is Taiwan. That's why I just mentioned about the first is Hong Kong, the next is Taiwan, and later on it's the rest of Asia or the world. Especially, we just aware how President Xi suggested to implement one country, two system framework, not only in Hong Kong, but also in Taiwan. That's the announcement of Beijing around early 2019. So with such situation, I think the age or the era of isolation should end already. And Taiwan deserves more global community to support. And that's also the reason for me to launch the petition and urge world leaders should welcome Taiwan to join the World Health Assembly, the WHA meeting, to show the support and the engagement of Taiwanese people.
Thank you. Next on the list of questioners is Richard Lloyd Parry, and he is with the Times newspaper of the UK. Richard?
Good afternoon. Thank you for making the time. You may not be aware of this, but in my own newspaper, in the Times this morning, there is an article by Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister. I think it's also in the South China Morning Post today, in which Boris Johnson confirms that if China goes ahead and imposes a national security law, Britain will then make changes to its own immigration rules, which will allow Hong Kong holders of the British National Overseas Passport to come to the UK for renewable periods of 12 months and be given the chance to work, eventually placing them on a route to citizenship. And he says this is Britain's duty to uphold our profound ties of history and friendship with the people of Hong Kong. So my first simple question is to ask you, what is your reaction to that? Does that help Hong Kong? And what more should Britain in particular do to help Hong Kong at the moment? That's question number one. The second question, rather simple question, is about your tactics and strategy from now on. From what Joshua was saying, the strategy appears to be to continue with large-scale street demonstrations. Now, I take your point about the way the coronavirus is being used for political purposes, but still it's hard to believe that that isn't going to have an effect and to deter some of the larger numbers of people who came out last year. Is that same strategy, the large-scale marches we saw last year, adequate to the new situation? Or do you have any new ideas about how to continue to press your points home? And I'd like to put those questions first to Joshua, and I welcome comments from the other two panelists. Thanks.
Thanks. Joshua, you're up first.
Yeah, so with our observation and comparison, of course, in 2019 summer, it will be easier to mobilize people take to the street, but it's lucky that the pandemic in Hong Kong almost end already. So on the upcoming summer, I am quite optimistic that we can mobilize more people take back to the street to show the solidarity and unity of Hong Kongers. But I think national security legislation is more different than what we realized and what we experienced in 2019, because in 2019, the extradition bill still went through the legislation process in Hong Kong. But according to the announcement of Beijing a few weeks ago, the national security law will just bypass Hong Kong legislature. Lawmakers in Hong Kong even can't have a vote on this issue. So it is more terrible and also affecting more of the status of Hong Kong being the global financial center. So I think how to continue our protest movement to oppose the national security legislation, it not only depends on how the mass mobilization or whether we can gather more than 1 million of Hong Kongers take back to the street again. It also depends on no matter labor strike, class boycott would also be considered to be the tactics put pressure on Beijing. And more important is, I hope to let the world to know that international advocacy or our international campaign is not only focusing under the framework of the tension between US and China. It's more about the solidarity with global alliance. And when Hong Kong facing a strong erosion, and it's quite impressive that when more than 700 legislators around the world issued this joint statement to criticize the implementation of the national security law, more than 100 of them will come from Japan. So it just shows that even Japan and other countries, they could also take a more active role to support Hong Kong protesters. And refer to the question of UK, I would say that, of course, no matter providing the citizenship or about how to amend existing arrangement or immigration policy for BNO passport holder, it will be really supportive and also encourage Hong Kong people in such difficult timing. But more important is, I think, actions speak louder than words, and how to enhance the Global Magnitsky Act and take reference from what announced by the White House in Washington to impose partial economic sanction, targeted red capitals from Beijing or etc. It could also let the communist regime to realize that even they ignore the voice of Hong Kongers, they can't ignore the voice of global community.
For the mass mobilization in Hong Kong, I have to admit there would be higher risk than last year because of a year of mobilization. People may still coming out, and actually, I think because of the national security law, the people with fury and disappointment would be would not less than the things being happened because of the anti-extradition movement. And I think if there is a chance to have a protest which is being approved by government, there must be so many people coming out in that time. But yeah, for sure, now the Hong Kong government is trying to ban any kinds of the protest in assembly, and we still do not have very optimistic estimation for whether they will allow for the public assembly. It would be a tactic for them. But I have to say that the problem in Hong Kong right now is the majority of the Hong Kong people do not support for what Hong Kong government is now doing. And it is impossible to have any governance for a government itself. And for the questions about the immigration policy of Britain, actually any act and any measurements to, to deal with the problem that Hong Kong people are now facing, I think it is appreciated. But I also believe that as a Hong Kongers, if we have choice, we would like to stay in Hong Kong and fight for the freedom and democracy and an ideal future of Hong Kong as we can.
Thank you. Richard, I believe you have a follow-up question. Can you make it a brief one if you can?
Yes, could I just clarify what Joshua said? Am I right in understanding what you said to be this, that you welcome Boris Johnson's move over citizenship, but you also think that Britain should impose economic sanctions on China? Is that right? And what kind of sanctions should those be?
Yes, you're right. Apart from what announced or recommended by Boris Johnson, I would say that partial sanction to targeted red capital companies related to dual-use technology or any pro-Beijing politician who might have their family members or they might be the passport holder, a UK passport holder. They could also be targeted and let Beijing to realize that how the world will not only keep their criticism on statement, they will really take action and put pressure on Beijing. Because I think now the situation is far more different than what we experienced in the previous day. And once the national security law passed, secret police could come to Hong Kong and the prosecution took place in China, we might be jailed in Beijing. So, and I think one point is just easy to make the situation clear to explain. If tomorrow we can't commemorate the student of Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989 in Hong Kong, so what's the difference of Hong Kong and mainland China? It just proved how Hong Kong turned from the one country, two system to one country, one system.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to the next question, and this one is from Shigeaki Kanehira, and he is with TBS. Kanehira-san, hold on 1 second. You're muted. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, all right. Just wait 1 second. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Kanehira of TBS Television. My colleague Kusakabe-san is saying hello to Agnes. And I have just one question, Joshua. You went last year. You went to Washington D.C. and made a great address at Capitol Hill, and you can see the very the chaotic situation in the United States. Can you find a common goal between massive movement which is spread widely in the United States against racism and your anti-mainland protest in Hong Kong? Thank you.
Thank you. Joshua?
Yeah. As the one who engaged in street activism or social movement since high school, of course, I'm really inspired and impressed by the March for Our Life campaign a few years ago till now. And more important is, apart from anti-authoritarian crackdown from Beijing, I think how Hong Kongers, since the student movement in umbrella in our umbrella movement or our civil disobedience campaign or etc. It also implies that how even youngsters still in school or millennials could take a significant position to let those upclass elite to realize that those ruling class should listen to the voice of the next and the young generation. Of course, with the situation happening in the United States, also send a clear signal to the government how they should hold the police accountability. But I think instead of just only focusing on what happening in the recent days, I think more important is systematic reform of the police force around the world might be a common trend in the future, because brutality is not only exists in a country that is undemocratic. It also exists in some of the democratic countries. But apart from only focusing on some of the scene reported by TV news or etc., more important is the government around the world, no matter in US, in Italy, in France, or in Hong Kong, or in different countries, they should provide the proposal how to reform and to solve the crisis instead of escalate the tension. That's the responsibility of the government.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to respond to that question? Agnes? Nope.
Well, I would say that it's the police problem of the police and its brutality. It's actually a common problem that it's happening and it's existing in many of the countries over around the world, but not only China or Hong Kong. So I think the most important thing that is that the government and the authority should respect and always listen to the opinion of people. I'm not only commenting on the situation of the states, but also the whole world. It's always the responsibility of the government to respect to public opinion and and also to think more about how should they use their power when people are having discontent and anger against the government.
Thank you. Okay, well, the next question I will read out rather. It comes from Anthony Rowley, and he is writing for the South China Morning Post. Did Hong Kong make a serious attempt to pass its own internal security as was apparently agreed at the time of the 1997 agreement? In other words, would it not have been better for Hong Kong to have passed its own security law instead of waiting for the law to be imposed on it by China? That's the question to anybody who wants to answer it.
Well, according to the Basic Law, which is the mini constitution of Hong Kong, on the Article 23 that the Hong Kong government tried to implement in 17 years ago in 2003, it's something like national security law that would obviously suppress the rights, political rights and freedom of Hong Kong people. And 17 years ago, Hong Kong people had already voiced out our very clear message to the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government that we don't need the national security law, that 17 years ago there were already over 500,000 of Hong Kong people going out on the streets while I was 6 years old at that time, and I joined that protest also actually with my dad, and that we have a very clear message to the Hong Kong and Chinese governments already. So I think the most important thing that the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government should do is not always trying to suppress the opposition of the Hong Kong people, but try to understand why Hong Kong people would have such anger against the government. The main reason is that we don't have democracy, and it seems that the authority is never respecting our rights and freedom, and that is the core problem that we are facing, and this is also the core reason that why Hong Kong people are having such discontent and anger against the government.
My opinion is just to compare the difference, just like what Agnes Chow said. When there is 17 years ago, when there was a legislation of Article 23 also related to national security, and that in that moment, the government just stopped the legislation because the majority of the Hong Kong people worry about one country, two systems could be eliminated because of that. And we know that in basic law, under basic law, there is the obligation for Hong Kong to have the legislation of national security. But you can't neglect the majority's thinking. If the same problem continues, such problems still exist nowadays. And according to the Public Opinion Service in Hong Kong recently, there is also over 60 of the people still do not agree that the Chinese government should have the legislation directly from themselves. And what I think is under basic law, it is not only about the national security legislation, but also an obligation for Hong Kong government to have universal suffrage. But just what we have seen and what we have experienced since umbrella movement, the decision being granted by the Chinese government has already eliminated the hope for true universal suffrage. Yeah, we can see that there is a diversified view on two of that, and that is the nature of one country and two systems could be successful.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for a couple of more questions. Next up is Jesse Johnson, and he is with the Japan Times newspaper. Jesse, have you got your question ready?
Yeah, am I on here?
You're on. We can hear you.
You on?
Okay, great. First of all, thank you for taking the time, three of you. My question is directed at all of you. Traditionally, Japan has kind of taken a relatively low-key approach to criticizing China on rights issues. And then with the Japanese Foreign Ministry officials saying that Japan can't go along with the proposed sanctions that would strip Hong Kong of its special treatment, given that the potential effect on Japan's economy, what do you think realistically? What would you ask Tokyo in response to the crackdown by Beijing? And then one other question. Do you plan to focus more on the economic impact in order to get more support from countries like Japan?
Well, I would say that we're responding to the situation in Japan. Well, it says, well, we could see clearly that Japan is always, well, putting it as a very, low-key position in criticizing China because, well, we also understand that but the economic, relationship between Japan and China or between Japan and Hong Kong would be always very important for the economy of both countries. But we could also see that actually recently there are already over actually 100 of the parliament member from the Japanese parliament that they join the opposition against the national security law. It is, well, I'm actually very surprised that over 100 of the parliament member of Japan are joining the opposition, the signature movement. Well, we hope that in the coming future, the Japanese government and also more politicians from Japan would have a clearer stance, against the national security law, because we believe that this law would not only be harmful to Hong Kong but also would be very harmful to Japan, as well many Japanese companies and even the Japanese government is actually having a very close economic and political and cultural relationship with Hong Kong. So if the one country, two systems, if our judicial independence or rule of law is being destroyed by Beijing, it would be also very destructive to the economy of Japan also. And we also realize that the Japanese government, that Prime Minister Abe, is planning to invite President Xi Jinping to Japan, officially this year, maybe a few months later after the COVID-19. And we could say that it might be not a very appropriate timing to invite President Xi when the human rights situation and when the situation in Hong Kong is being criticized by the international community. So we also hope that Prime Minister Abe Shinzo and the Japanese government could think, could think twice about whether they really need to, invite presidency to Japan.
My my personal perception about the relation between China and Japan's economic relation is they treat Hong Kong is exceptional. At least what I think under my personal communication with different people doing business in Japan or whatever in prefecture level or what. Sometimes they try to, there are many agricultural products or any many related business going using Hong Kong as a hub to have the wholesale and retail into the China or selling to Hong Kong directly. And I think that they think Hong Kong is exceptional. And if there is the change of political system and there are political unrest because of one country, two systems is going to be eliminated, and I think that it is not the hope for Japan or even the people doing business in Japan. They can't use Hong Kong as a middle point or cornerstone for them to do the business anymore. And at least maybe they can, but they will have more risk or they will have much more uncertainty of that. And I'm very sure that it is not what the international community hopes.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Joshua, would you like to respond or are you okay?
Okay.
Okay. Our last question is going to come from Pio D'Emilia. He's sitting beside me here and over to you, Pio.
Hi, this is Pio from Sky TG23. Thank you guys for joining us today. Appreciate very much. Joshua, this is a specific question about Italy. You mentioned Italy a couple of times today. Last time we met, you were about to leave and go to Italy to receive an award, but you were blocked by the Hong Kong tribunal. Now, what would you advise the Italian government? I know you have issues with our government because it is the only one that have signed the One Belt, One Road agreement with China, and it's kind of silent against what is happening right now. So could you kindly tell us what is your opinion about the position of the Italian government and what do you expect us to do? Well, the Italian government.
How Beijing broke the promise in the Sino-British Joint Declaration, the international treaty registered in the United Nations, which implied Beijing could also broke the promise in the One Belt, One Road initiative agreement and result in the negative impact or even suffer in the economic loss of Italy government. Especially, I hope to let more people in Europe to realize that it's not only about the tension between US and China. It's about while China continues to expand its authoritarian value, not only in Hong Kong, but also all over the world, how the world could stand with Hong Kong with our belief in universal value. And especially China is the one who ignore the international order and all those liberal values that we all believe in. So specifically to, I think my course on Italy is really clear. We know there's a lawmaker in Italy already introduced the resolution to against the national security law for Hong Kong and also supporting sanctions towards Beijing. So when this resolution being introduced, we wish it could be passed in Italian Parliament. At the same time, compared to UK, Germany, or other governments in European Union have already voiced out their concern of the erosion of one country, two systems. Until this stage, Italian government still keeps silence. But I think now is the time for Italian government to realize that it's not, now the situation in Hong Kong is not similar as the umbrella movement in 2014 or the anti-extradition bill movement in 2019. It's about whether Hong Kong can still be Hong Kong or Hong Kong will return to be the place with great firewall, without free flow of information and national security legislation could control the free flow of capital, and it would just turn Hong Kong to be the next Xinjiang and Tibet, and the world must speak up for it. So I think passing the resolution and reconsider how to reduce the participation or the involvement in a Belt and Road Initiative would be a good direction for Italian government.
Thank you, Joshua. Just one very last question. Tonight, are you going to do something? Are you still going outside? Are you going to commemorate the vigil of Tiananmen anyway? Do you expect clashes? Do you expect some troubles?
24 hours later will be the evening of June 4th. And I believe no matter Agnes, Nok-hin, or I, three of us will also continue to commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre happened 31 years ago, and how we also have to continue the protest on street and to oppose the national security legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to, if you don't mind, I know you guys have other things to do, but would you mind taking one more question? We are over time. This one is from NHK, the public service broadcaster here in Japan, from Koji Ekuan.
My name is Koji Ekuan. Thank you for making this time. はじめまして、ありがとうございます。I have two questions. The first question is simple. Do you think in Hong Kong, one country, two systems, the functions still now, or do you think it's dead? And the second question is about the Tiananmen anniversary gathering. Do you think how it will go from the next year? That's all.
Well, we think that one country, two system, would become one country, one system after the national security law being used by the Chinese government and being used in Hong Kong. So, it would be, as a Hong Konger, sometimes we would also feel very, desperate that, China as such a powerful regime, as such a strong regime, it seems that it's very difficult to fight against this authoritarian regime. But for us, it is very important to protect our hometown. So even the national security law is coming, and even Hong Kong, the one country, two systems of Hong Kong has already become one country, one system. And this, this truth is being not only recognized by the Hong Kong people and the state's government, but later on, I believe that this would be recognized by the whole international community, as we could see that our freedom, our rights, even our rights to use Facebook or Google or Instagram would be being suppressed by the Chinese government. So we really hope that the international community, not only the states and not only the UK, but more people and more governments from the international community could voice out their opposition over the national security law. And we believe that the pressure from the international community would be very important for Hong Kong people and also for the world economy.
Thank you.
I think my description to one country, two systems is now really dying. But what I would like to say is in different sectors in Hong Kong, they try to have their self-defense, like the civil society sector. They just try to do whatever they can. For the teachers, they have to protect themselves, avoid being complained. And there is also, after the COVID-19, some of the nurses and doctors has launched a labor strike in order to demand our government to have a better policies towards to avoid the much more serious situation because of the coronavirus. But there is consequence since there is some of the pro-Beijing politicians saying that they should be fired and they should have consequence of that. Many of the sectors within the civil society are defending themselves for the freedom and autonomy for themselves. But I think that would that be long-lasting? Sometimes I question, because just for the ruling coalitions for themselves, they can do whatever they can in order to achieve or to silence someone or some kinds of the people.
Thank you. We're going to just have one very quick question, and this one is again from Richard Lloyd Parry of the Times. Richard?
Thank you. It's a very simple yes/no question. Do the three panelists have British nationals overseas status? Whether or not you have the passport, do you have that status?
Well, I'm not holding the BNO passport, and I am actually holding the British citizenship passport, but I gave up my British citizenship 2 years ago before participating in the Legislative Council election, because according to the legal system, according to the law of Hong Kong, we have to give up our overseas citizenship if we want to run for the election. So 2 years ago, I gave up my British citizenship.
I'm also not holding any citizenship overseas. I'm holding the HKSAR passport. Yeah.
How about Joshua?
I'm only holding the Hong Kong passport, and that's all.
Thanks.
Thanks. Well, as I understand it, potentially this applies to 300,000 Hong Kong British national overseas passport holders. But I read that if all of those who are eligible for a BNO passport were given one, it could be up to 2.5 million people, which is a lot of people. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for our press conference. Just as a public service announcement, we will let you know, because we will get the inevitable criticism of being one-sided and so on, that we have invited the Chinese ambassador to Japan, to the FCCJ, and we would welcome his presence here if he wants to come. It's an open invitation to discuss any of the points raised today, or indeed any aspect of Chinese rule or China's relations with Japan. Many thanks to our three speakers today: Joshua Wong, Agnes Chow, and Nok-hin. Three articulate, brave people. We wish them the best. Stay safe. For everybody joining us at home, thank you, and we will see you for our next press conference. Just a reminder that the video of today's presser will be available on the FCCJ's website before the day is out, I believe. Thank you to Teddy Jimbo, my fellow co-chair, and over here to Peter Milia, who helped organize today's press conference. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.